Hey everybody, I'm Corey Stark with News 4 here in St. Louis. As part of our coverage for the August 2nd primary election here in Missouri, we are interviewing the leading candidates in some of the key races. Today we are sitting down with Democratic U.S. Senate candidate Lucas Kunce, who is looking to replace Senator Roy Blunt, who is retiring at the end of this year. Lucas, really appreciate your time and being here this afternoon. So let's first start of who is Lucas Kunce? Give us a little bit of your background.
Yeah, sure. I'm a Missouri kid. I was born and raised in Jeff City, working class neighborhood, but just a magical place, right? Like, everybody just took care of each other. I'll give you an example. My parents got married young, 19 and 22. We're always paycheck to paycheck, but the guy at the grocery store would let us float a check till the end of the month. And when my family went bankrupt from medical bills because my sister had a heart surgery, like everybody in that community took care of us. They brought food by the house, they passed the plate down at church, and just been trying to live a life of service ever since to honor what they did for me. I did 13 years in the Marine Corps. I deployed to Iraq once, deployed to Afghanistan twice, did arms control negotiations with NATO and Russia out of the Pentagon, and now, I'm still ready to serve, so I'm here to do this Senate seat.
And you never held an elected office before. Why is now the time for you to run for U.S. Senate here in Missouri, and how has that campaign been going so far for you?
Sure, for me, this is the front line for the fight for democracy, right? This is where Missourians feel like they have no power. They feel like no matter who they vote for, they never get any power. And I mean, that old neighborhood that used to take care of me, when I look at it today, the first house I lived in is an empty lot. It's been bulldozed down. The one I joined the Marine Corps out of is boarded up. The corner store is boarded up. That grocery store is gone. And it's just, I joined the Marine Corps to serve that community. I watched our country spend $6.4 trillion in Iraq and Afghanistan. I watched it, literally watched it personally. And then I come home and see that happen to my old neighborhood. Like, our communities are being stripped for parts. No one ever wants to invest money here at home. They're always willing to spend it overseas. They're always willing to give it to Wall Street. And so for me, I have all this experience. I worked out of the Pentagon. I've seen the way that it works. I want to take that experience and I'll actually serve the people of Missouri, the people who took care of me as a kid.
Let's talk about the issues. There's a lot of those here in 2022.
Yeah.
It seems like the biggest one facing a lot of Missourians and those across the country right now is the high rate of inflation in our economy. So what sort of grade do you give President Biden right now on handling the economy, and what should he do to bring down inflation, or what can be done to bring down inflation?
Yeah, there's one thing that we need to do, and that's we need to make things in America again. Like, the reason we have high inflation is because we don't make anything here anymore. When I was at the Pentagon, we had a study done that showed that you can't make a single weapon system without an input for China. Not a single one. Like, that's crazy, right? We've literally outsourced all of our capabilities. I mean, you see that in Missouri. How many things have been sold overseas, right? Monsanto, Anheuser-Busch. It's just, the list is long. Smithfield, one of our biggest pork producers. Other people control our markets. And then with COVID, what you saw is a supply chain that was just strung so tight that the second there was a disruption, it just popped. You no longer have enough supply. Demand is still there. Prices shoot through the roof. And so, on fuel, we see multinational corporations and a cartel of the Russians, the Saudis and some other countries running our oil prices with record profits, not wanting to pump more because they're more interested in profit per barrel. So what we need to do is we need to break up monopolies. We need to invest in creating things in America. We need to invest in the next generation of energy here. We need to actually invest in production here again, or we're never going to catch up. We're always going to be relying on places like China for not just our products, but also the future of our energy.
So what grade would you give President Biden on doing some of those things thus far to try to bring down inflation?
He did a competition policy executive order last year, which was a decent step, but he really needs to go after these big businesses. He really needs to pursue the Sherman Antitrust Act and other things that have been put in place to protect all of us from things like corporate greed, things like corporate monopolies. And he put a great person in charge of the FTC, Lena Khan, and I think he should continue to empower her and have her really go after these companies that are stripping our country for parts. They're violating Buy America provisions and just leaving us all worse off.
You talk about the national $15 per hour minimum wage. It seems like these days you have to pay at least that amount to get some employees in certain sectors. But why not let the free market determine wages like it seems to be doing right now? And why is $15 an hour seems to be that magic number that you support as well?
Look, like $15 an hour, honestly, here's the thing. This all comes back to who has power in the country, right? And so when you're in a situation where you have monopsony employers who are able to decide what people will take for wages because there's not enough competition in the marketplace, they can drive wages down and they can put people at a disadvantage. And so, that's where we need to use our collective bargaining power that we use through the government, we use through unions, things like that, to push wages back up. And I'd say what you really see here on wages is, if you look at 1975 and the percent of wages that went compared wages, minimum wage, for example, to GDP, if you had the same minimum wage relative to productivity that you had in 1975, minimum wage right now would actually be $24 an hour. Rand did a study on this. So $15 is not enough, but it's a good start. We need to get there. And the same thing goes for just median wages, right? If the median wage in America right now is about $50,000. If it had kept up with our productivity, it would be $95,000 right now. We are behind, and the reason we're behind is because we are letting the corporations have more and more power. We're letting them buy off our politicians. We're letting them leverage their money, their campaign donations. This is why I'm not taking any corporate PAC money. I think it's wrong. I'm not taking federal lobbyist money because we write a scheme of laws that work for them and leave the rest of us behind. And so minimum wage, that's just a way to start clawing back a little bit of power, but it's not enough. We need to go after them. We need to break them up so that there's a real competitive market again.
So what would you like to push for if it's 15 not enough? Is there a number in your mind? You mentioned the 24 from the study. Is that the range that you think is?
Yeah, right now I support a $15 minimum wage because I think I think that's the first step. But what I want to do is change our economy and get us to a point where we can get to just I'm not even asking for more than we used to have, right? What I'm asking for is to get back to where we were in 1975. How sad is that? And I think that the people in charge of our country, they don't understand how everyday people live. They don't realize, and this is a national tragedy, that the average American, and especially the average Missourian, they live paycheck to paycheck in one disaster from bankruptcy. That's how we live. And these guys, they don't make decisions for us. They make decisions on who funds their campaigns, and that leaves us behind. Like I said, I know what that's like to grow up that way. My parents were paycheck to paycheck. They wrote the check at the grocery store, begging the manager not to cash it on the 22nd, 26th, 27th, 28th. And he would do that because he took care of us. And then we went bankrupt. My mom got cancer 10 years ago. She was working an hourly job. And you know what happens when you got cancer in this country and you work an hourly job? You're moving in with somebody else because you can't afford your bills anymore. And so she moved in with me and I took care of her. That's not how it should work in America.
You favor a student loan forgiveness program, is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. Your critics point out that such a program could create the largest transfer of wealth to the upper class in history, leaving those who actually took extra jobs to pay for college and kind of went through that struggle in the dust. So why is it a good thing for this loan forgiveness program?
It's really about stimulating our economy. It's about giving people the power to purchase. I'm a millennial. I went to college, and frankly, I didn't have debt coming out of college because I was so broke that I got a Pell Grant from the federal government, and I got scholarships from people around town, right? That set me up to serve my country, to serve my community in a way that other people wouldn't necessarily be able to, right? I got to join the Marine Corps. Again, I did real things. I went to Iraq. I went to Afghanistan twice. I sat across the table from Russians in arms control negotiations. That's a great thing that I was able to do that for our country. And when I look at this program, I had law school debt from Mizzou. I went to Mizzou Law School. I had debt from that. I paid it off, but I don't consider that as something to hold over other people and say, because I was able to get employment where I was able to pay it off, you should suffer. And a lot of the people who are really hurting from this student debt, it's minority communities who got sold a bill of goods about these for-profit institutions and how they had to have a college degree to even be a receptionist these days, right? That's crazy. They're never going to be able to pay it back. They're never going to be able to afford a house, especially the way housing prices are going right now. We need to give people in America, everyday folks, the opportunity to participate in our economy and live the American dream.
Many Democrats, including Cori Bush here in St. Louis, are unapologetic about calling for defunding the police. Where do you stand on that issue?
No, I think we need to invest in our communities. I don't think we should defund the police. I see in St. Louis, we have a huge number of crimes that aren't being solved, though, and the city's really hurting from crime. I'd like one of the things we can do, I think, is to take the burden off police on responding to a bunch of the calls that don't necessarily need to be police calls, mental health calls, other sorts of ones. We can fund other programs that relieve them from doing that and get responders who are better equipped to respond to that type of situation. I think we'll have less escalation, we'll have less violence if we do that. So I do see funding other programs, but I don't see defunding any of them.
Is it a concern, as we've seen, of fewer people going into law enforcement. They're having a hard time recruiting. We've talked about that locally here and different levels in the sheriff's departments.
I've seen that.
Is that a major concern for you?
It is a concern, and really the concern for me, it goes back, I mentioned before going to Iraq and Afghanistan, seeing our country spend $6.4 trillion there, seeing our politicians on both sides say, send us your sons and daughters, give us your trillions of dollars, we're building something real and lasting here, right? Collapsed in Iraq, 11 days it collapsed in Afghanistan. If you went there like I did, you could see that coming, you talked about it. And so for me, I just think it's a real national tragedy that we're willing to spend $6.4 trillion over there, but we won't invest in programs here in our own neighborhoods, and like the one that I grew up in, that I signed up to serve, and things like after-school programs, early childhood education, universal pre-K, things that will reduce crime long-term, give us a better society, give us more productivity, help us compete with countries like China where they're actually investing in people and in education. And so I think that there's two tiers. Like you try to do the Band-Aid at the end, right? But like let's prevent the wound to begin with. Let's prevent the crime by actually investing in communities again. Speaking
of investment and spending. Many progressive Democrats in Congress voted against the Biden infrastructure bill that meant billions of dollars for bridges, roads, broadband in Missouri, claiming that it needed to be passed as part of a bigger second package. How would you have voted on that infrastructure bill?
Oh, I would have voted for the infrastructure bill. I mean, that's great union jobs here. It's investing in America. But, of course, I wouldn't give up right after that was passed, right? The other stuff is hugely important, and we need to fight for it. I mean, these are investments in our communities. And the thing that really makes me mad is, every time our government decides to, save the economy or invest somewhere, they take money and they give it to Wall Street and let Wall Street do what they want with it, right? That's their thing. That's their plan every single time. You saw that in the Great Recession. What do? We bail out the Wall Street banks. You saw that during the pandemic, right? Oh, there's no money to invest in all these other things, but there's $120 billion that we can print every single month to give to Wall Street. That's what we did during the pandemic. They don't invest in protection. They don't invest in our communities. They don't invest in anything that makes our lives better, right? What they do is they search for yield. They buy up our housing stock, which runs the price of our housing through the roof. They invest overseas. They inflate the stock market during a recession. It makes no sense. It doesn't help any of us. Like, we need to have real programs that invest here. The ones I talked about before, that are infrastructure related. But we also need to start doing things like making semiconductor chips here, right? All our semiconductors come from Taiwan right now. Just wait till Taiwan is the next Ukraine and see what happens, right? We won't be able to have an economy anymore. And it's because we have let Wall Street outsource literally everything. We need to attach strings to that money, and we need to make sure that we bring things back here, or we're in real trouble.
You've talked about investment overseas quite a bit, so I want to go into the response that the United States has had with Ukraine. How do you think President Biden, the administration, is handling the situation? Should we be more involved or less involved? As we know, billions of dollars have gone over to Ukraine to help that country.
Right, sure. So that's a Band-Aid, right? Like, those billions of dollars are a Band-Aid to help them fight on the front lines. It doesn't solve the problem. I used to do arms control negotiations with NATO and Russia. And what you're seeing right now is a result of Western Europe buying Russian gas for years, right? Russia, when I was doing these arms control negotiations, Russia had already invaded Ukraine in 2014. They'd invaded Georgia, another neighboring country, in 2008. I'm going over to NATO and I'm like, look guys, here's the intel. They're building up to do something again. They're modernizing their military, and you all are funding it. You're funding it by buying all of their gas. We need you to take a hard position against these guys. And you know what? Our allies wouldn't do it because they were enjoying that cheap gas, and they expected you and me and everybody who's watching to subsidize their cheap gas by sending more American troops and equipment over to defend them against the threat that they were funding. And so what we need to do right now, in Western Europe, by the way, they finally realized their mistake, and they're like, oh man, we got to get off of this gas from Russia because it's not a good idea. Right? And where they're looking for the next generation, though, is China. It's not here. And so what we could do right now is Putin's got enough money to run this war for as long as he wants. What we need to do is we need to sanction his gas. 40% of his gas purchases are done in U.S. dollars. We can stop all those purchases, and then he will run out of money, and that war will end. That's what we need to do. We need to give Zelensky and the Ukrainians leverage by sanctioning the gas. But at the same time, I keep talking about production in America. We need to invest in the next generation of energy here. That's wind and solar. It's modular nuclear. It's hydrogen. It's battery technology. Everything else, so that we don't end up trading the Russians and the Saudis for China on our energy dependence in the future. That would be an absolute tragedy. Our country would never catch up from that. And so what I'm saying they need to do is they need to sanction the gas, and we need to make that investment right now for our future.
So are you fine with the billions of dollars and the resources that have gone over there thus far?
I'm fine with what we've done so far, but I'm telling you, it's not a solution, right? It has not brought the Russians to the negotiating table. Well, they're at the negotiating table, but it's not bringing it to a conclusion. I have negotiated with these guys before. They're all about power. They're about coercion. They're very realist, and they will realize that if they're running out of money, that they need to go negotiate to conclusion. Right now, they got money as long as they want because Western Europe's still buying their gas. We need to put an end to that, and we'll come to a negotiated settlement.
There is renewed talk about reparations for Black Americans for generations of racism. Would you support such a taxpayer-paid program for that?
What I really want to do is look at investment in communities that have been left behind, and that is our Black communities, right? And I'll give you a good example. So there's this town nobody knows about in southeast Missouri called Hayti Heights. Hayti Heights is an all-Black town. The saddest moment of this entire campaign for me was my friend My Angel calls me up and she says, hey, you know, my cousin, Mayor Robinson, is the mayor of this town in the Boot Heel called Hayti Heights. They're having a problem with their water system. Could you go check it out? I think they need help. I said, yeah, My Angel, whatever you say, I'm coming. So I called up Mayor Robinson. She said, can you come down next week? I think you'll see what we got going on here is something that you would be interested in. And so I go down to the Boot Heel. I go down to Hayti Heights. I'm telling you, the saddest sight I've seen on the entire campaign trail. The community, the people in that town, they're currently buying water from Hayti, the neighboring town, because their water system is completely defunct. It had pollutant levels that would kill a kid, right? And so it got shut down. And the neighboring town, Hayti, says, we don't have the resources, our system's not made so that you can keep using it. We're going to have to kick you off the water system. And so the people of Hayti Heights on this day were on the side of a rural highway in the middle of nowhere in southeast Missouri selling hot dogs and potato chips to try to raise enough money to fix their water system. Never going to happen. Never going to happen. It takes millions of dollars, and they're just there absolute in desperation because nobody will help them. And then it gets worse. She says, we need to go check the pumps. I'm sorry, can you come with me? I said, yeah, I'll check the pumps with you. I don't know what that means. And so we go over to the pumps, and it turns out their sewage system is also down. And I swear to God, it was like I was back in Iraq. You know, in Iraq, there are all these like hand-powered, you know, hand-cranked, gas-powered pumps to move irrigation and other things. We got them in Missouri, too. And so what they've done is because their subterranean pumps have broken, is they keep jerry-rigging these irrigation pumps up to their sewage system. And every 2 hours, someone in that town, usually the mayor, who's like, you know, a young Black woman my age, has to go over to the pumps, fill it up with gasoline, and hand-crank it to keep the sewage moving. I was like, wow, is there anything we can do here? Have you talked to the state? Like, this is madness. And she was like, the state? She's like, the state only cares about it when we don't fill the pumps up and it overflows and they come in and fine us for creating an environmental disaster. Like, that's an American tragedy here. It's an all-Black community that's completely left behind. This is the type of investment we need to make so that people have a chance again. You know, they're doing it. They're working hard down there. Howardville has a similar situation with the school that's falling apart. Like we do need to invest in these communities. It should be institutional investment, and it needs to be done in a way that lifts everyone up and gives them the same opportunities that anyone else would have.
Another big issue going on right now, the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and you have indicated that you'd like to codify Roe v. Wade.
That's right.
Which would legalize abortions, allow for most abortions through the second trimester. Yet, a recent Harvard-Harris poll found that 60% of Democrats support restricting abortion to 15 weeks or less. Why is the 15-week period not a good compromise in your eyes?
Here's the thing for me on Dobbs getting overturned, right? Like, I went to Iraq and Afghanistan. I saw what it was like to live in a big brother government where you have a two-tiered system of rights, where if you have wealth, you have power, you have access to everything. I mean, I remember watching a police chief guzzle alcohol, and this is the same guy whose job it is in a sober country to arrest people and throw them in jail for having alcohol. And you see things like that over and over again. You know, if you're wealthy there, you have power, you have access, you're going to go, you send your kids to Swiss boarding school, you're rich, you got a great life, right? You have all the human rights that anyone would ever expect. And if you don't, you have nothing. And the thing for me is to hear that, you know, we were fighting for freedom. You know, they tell me over and over again, we're fighting for freedom over there. And now, like, I really feel like freedom is under attack here. And when I talk about the Dobbs decision, like, you know, the country club Republicans who signed into effect Missouri's law that says no exceptions for abortion, even in rape or incest, they're still going to go get an abortion if they need it, just like they've always done. And you know, the people who aren't going to be able to are the people in my old neighborhood, the people who don't have the means, who don't have the wealth. They're not going to be able to get it. And so for me, I don't think we should have a two-tiered society where you have access to certain type of rights and certain type of livelihood if you have wealth, and otherwise you're a second-class citizen. And so for me, I think codifying Roe versus Wade is how we make sure that that happens. We make sure everyone has equal access. You know, I had a woman call me the other day who said, She's evangelical, and she wasn't able to get an IUD because her employer decided that an IUD was birth control and it wasn't covered by her insurance. She doesn't have $2,000 to go out of pocket for an IUD, right? But if you're in a better situation, you can. Like, why should we have that discrepancy in rights? For me, that's un-American. It's something that I'm against.
Would you favor a proposal, progressives have brought this up, of increasing the size of the Supreme Court from 9 to 11 or 13? Do you think that the Supreme Court needs to be expanded?
So I think the real problem with the Supreme Court is that it has too much power. It's 9 people who were never elected, who oftentimes are corporate judges who don't care about regular Americans. Like, Democrats and Republicans have been packing our courts with corporate judges who don't enforce anti-monopoly laws and just make decisions based on what's good for businesses. And sadly, what's good for businesses is usually not what's good for America. I mean, the Exxon CEO himself said, "I am not an American business. I don't make decisions based on what's good for America." And so, despite taking billions of dollars from the taxpayer every year in subsidies. And so what I want to do is I want to actually legislate. I want to pass laws and use Article 3 of the Constitution, which, by the way, you know, the Constitution says that the Supreme Court gets original jurisdiction in cases of, I think it's treaties, cases where states are a party, and cases with, like, federal officials. And the rest, it's up to the Congress to create the courts and give them jurisdiction, and they can take it away with exceptions. And so what I want to do is actually pass things and take away the Supreme Court's right to review some of this stuff, right? Like, they're on a real power grab, and I don't think it's right to have non-elected officials who are there for 40 years make all of our decisions. And I want us to get back to democracy, right? And so if one side passes something that everybody else doesn't like, well, then the election system should work. We should, you know, people will vote for somebody else, and then we'll get to go the next way the next time. And so for me, I want to return to democracy and actually reduce the court's power, because I think they've done a serious power grab that's unjust.
And have you always felt that they've been on a power grab, or just now that it's conservative-leaning Supreme Court, from what it seems?
Oh, no. I mean, this is on every corporate decision that you would ever see. I mean, it's been going on for a generation, at least, since Borkian economics took over. And so these are people that are appointed by both sides, frankly, who are, again, non-democratically elected. They've made decisions interpreting things like the Sherman Antitrust Act so that we have monopolies that run our entire economy. And I know I keep talking about monopolies, but, like, monopolies are bad. They push down wages, they push up prices, they give consumers no choice, and oftentimes they ship our jobs overseas. And so for me, I don't think anyone should have that much political power. I think we have laws in place to make sure that they don't, but what we've seen is we've seen a court that doesn't care about that, because everybody on the court from both sides has been coming from corporate law firms where they just believe in that sort of Borkian economics that doesn't help us.
Would you like to see the end of the filibuster in the Senate, giving the party in power, the true party power
yes,
to
absolutely.
create laws?
I do think we should get rid of the filibuster, and I say that just because it is a tool of the status quo, right? If you like the status quo, if you're one of these big corporations who have real power and access in Congress, it means you only got to buy off a few people, right? It's fewer people to buy off. It's fewer people you give campaign contributions to. It gives you more opportunity to stop things from happening, and I think that's wrong. So again, like, let's let democracy decide. If they pass something and the other side gets in power, then they can overturn it.
Another issue, would you support a bill that prohibits classroom instruction about sexual orientation or gender identity in K through 3rd grades in public schools?
You know, I think that we need to let teachers decide what to teach. I also think we need to let parents get involved in that, and I really think this should be more of a local situation. I wouldn't support that, but I do think that I'm tired of people wanting the federal government to decide what goes on in the classroom, right? This is a very big umbrella government that doesn't necessarily need to get down to there, so I think there should be input from teachers. I think there should be input from parents and everything else, but no, that's not a bill I would support.
Okay. Where do you stand on the current gun rights, gun legislation? Obviously, there was a lot passed, a bipartisan bill in Congress that passed to kind of strengthen those, but what, if anything, more needs to be done?
Yeah, I mean, that bill's crazy, right? Like, they're so proud of this thing, and it does less than your average Missourian would want. And I say that because, I mean, you know, I grew up in Jeff City, right? I mean, it's a red area. I know plenty of gun owners. I'm one myself. And if you talk to gun owners, non-gun owners, Democrats, Republicans, independents, like, everybody is down with expanded background checks, red flag protections, and some sort of age limit or at least training that goes with access to these weapons, right? We don't want criminals, teenagers, and terrorists to just get access to weapons like this. It doesn't make any sense. Like, who wants a criminal or terrorist to have access to this, right? Right now, it's so easy to get that, and you see gun violence increasing. And, you know, I just think we should do those 3 things to mitigate the damage. so that we don't have the situations that we're having right now. And again, it's sad to me that Congress won't even go that far. And the other thing on this one, some people are like, an age limit? Well, I don't know about that. And it's like, well, you know what? If anybody knows about giving an assault weapon to an 18-year-old kid, it's the United States Marine Corps, man. I was there for 13 years, and I can tell you right now, we don't go out on a street corner and we're like, anybody want an assault weapon and some ammo, right? No. We do a real background check on everybody who comes in. We check their references, and then when they come into the Marine Corps, you still don't give them a weapon and a bunch of ammo. We would think that's crazy. We would truly think that's crazy. And so you observe them under stress during boot camp to make sure that they're capable of the responsibility. They learn about the weapon. They learn how to take it apart, put it back together. They learn all the weapon safety rules, right? You go through all that. And then when they first get rounds on the range, it is under strict observation from a non-commissioned officer to make sure they're not going to do anything stupid. And when they get through all that and graduate boot camp, if they want a weapon on base, we still don't just let an 18-year-old have a weapon in their barracks room, right? You got to store it in the armory, and you can come check it out when you need it, right? This is a very volatile population, and we need to make sure that we take care of them and everybody else. So, I mean, the things I want here are some sort of age limit. I want expanded background checks and red flag protections, which everybody can agree on.
So you don't support an assault weapons ban?
I support working towards something that everybody can agree on. I don't think everybody can agree on that. I think everybody can agree on this. And the sad thing for me is that Congress, they can't even get there on the thing that everybody agrees on. Like, that's not good.
What is the biggest foreign threat facing the United States?
I'm going to say the biggest threat to the United States, and I don't think it's foreign. It's the willingness of Wall Street and the people who run our society to literally sell the keys to our castle for a quarterly earnings report. They will do it. They will ship all of our industries overseas to China. They will do joint ventures with Chinese companies and give our intellectual property overseas. They will sell out our universities overseas. They will do everything. I mean, we found at the Pentagon that we couldn't make a single weapon system without inputs from China. That's crazy. It's crazy. It's truly crazy. And the fact that we are willing to let Wall Street make every decision for our country, for our economy, for our production, it's very bad for us. And so for me, I would say it's their willingness to sell us overseas, and the people you see taking advantage of that is a country like China, right? I mean, China sees that. They offer them quarterly earnings reports. They say, come here, invest here, and give us what we want, and we'll show you the profit that you want. And we've shipped everything overseas for that. And to me, the fact that we don't make anything here anymore makes us very, very vulnerable, very, very vulnerable. And so what I want to do, again, is I want to invest here again. I want to invest in production here again. That's the biggest threat to our national security, is that we don't invest in America anymore.
We talked about a lot. Anything else that you want to add that I haven't asked?
Yeah, I mean, this campaign is about fundamentally changing who has power in this country. It's why I don't take money from corporate PACs, no federal lobbyists, no fossil fuel executives, no big pharma executives, not money from the people that have been stripping us for parts. I'm tired of it. Like, we need people in the Senate who understand what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck, one disaster from bankruptcy, who understand what we need and who want to invest in our communities. We haven't had that in a very long time. We deserve that here in Missouri. I'm proud to be the candidate that's going to be that person, and I just look forward to meeting everybody out on the campaign trail.